football is probably the most popular sport in modern day America. Therefore, people love talking about it. Conference realignment has basically took over the news this past summer, and now that the season's going on, that's all people can really talk about. But what if I turned back time like Cher and talked about what football was like 50 years ago? As in a lot of ways it's the same, yet in a lot of ways completely different. Let's go and start with how football was really like. In 1973, college football had its very first year in the 3-division structure. So this was the very first year of D1 football. It had yet to split into FBS and FCS. So I'm pretty sure all the FCS schools were relegated to a lower division, while all of the normal FBS schools were really in a higher division because there's only like 12-ish conferences. Alright, why don't we start with the preseason poll. So USC was number 1 in the preseason poll in 1973. They did not finish number 1. That was a different school that I'll talk about later. But USC was a part of the Pac-8, essentially a version of the Pac-12 about 50 years ago. This Pac-8 had USC, UCLA, Stanford, Cal, Berkeley, Oregon State, Washington, and Washington State, only having schools from those 3 states that I kind of mentioned. Other ranked schools in there included UCLA at number 12, and USC did finish at number 8. What led to them falling in the rankings a little bit was them tying with Oklahoma, a team from the Big 8. Basically like the Big 12, but this Big 8 has changed quite more dramatically than the Pac-8 has. The Big 8 in 1973 had Oklahoma, Oklahoma State, Kansas, Kansas State, Missouri, Colorado, Nebraska, and Iowa State. Only Iowa State, the Kansas schools, and the Oklahoma schools are in the Big 12 today, with Colorado soon to join back into that group. So that is quite different indeed. Now, moving on to a different conference, the SEC. The SEC has more or less stayed about the same. They've added a few schools along the way, but their core schools are still there. Not a single school in the conference in 1973 has left. There are 10 schools in the SEC in 1973, including Georgia, Florida, Auburn, Bama, Mississippi State, Ole Miss, LSU, Vanderbilt, Tennessee, and Kentucky. The ranked schools in the SEC were Alabama at number 4, LSU number 13, and Tennessee at number 19. And going back to the Big 8, the ranked schools from the Big 8 included Oklahoma at number 3, Nebraska at number 7, Kansas at number 18, and Missouri at number 17, because I forgot to say that earlier. My bad. Nobody's perfect. Moving on to the Southwest, this is a conference that does not exist in any form today whatsoever. I pretty much call this the Texas Conference. All these schools are either in the SEC or the Big 12, and one of these schools is going to be soon in the ACC. And then there's another school that basically went all the way down to Conference USA. The schools in the Southwest included Arkansas, the only school not in Texas, Texas Tech, TCU, SMU, Baylor, Texas A&M, Texas, and Rice. All these schools were in the Southwest Conference, and all these schools eventually left the Southwest Conference, leaving it to pretty much die. Ranked schools from the Southwest Conference include Texas Tech at number 11 and Texas at number 14. Moving on to the ACC, we have schools like Maryland, Virginia, Wake Forest, Clemson, North Carolina, Duke, and NC State. All of these schools comprise of the ACC. ACC has changed a little bit and grown much larger, and Maryland has left the ACC since that time. The ranked schools at that time were NC State at number 16 and Maryland at number 20. Apparently, although in reality, Maryland was tied for 21st. I'll get into that later. Now, moving on to the Big 12. The Big Ten is probably one of the more interesting conferences in actually what happened that year. The Big Ten had Minnesota, Iowa, Wisconsin, Northwestern, Illinois, Purdue, Indiana, Michigan, Michigan State, and Ohio State. So not a lot of changes, only additions to the Big Ten since that period. But what happened in the Big Ten was kind of different. The Big Ten had to kind of make a dual champion. Although, this is a very interesting story. There was a major game at the end, Michigan, Ohio State. Obviously the largest rivalry in college football. Or not, maybe not obviously, but most people consider it the largest rivalry in college football. But this game, actually a part of a larger series of games called the 10-Year War, to mark just how intense this game was, actually ended in a tie. Both of these teams ended 10-0-1. So the Big Ten had a predicament on their hands. Essentially, they had to decide which one of these two schools would advance onto the Rose Bowl. So both teams were declared co-champions, but one of them had to go to the Rose Bowl. So the directors of the Big Ten ended up voting in Ohio State over Michigan. Of course, Michigan was really mad about this. But the reason they did this was because Michigan's quarterback was hurt, so they assumed Ohio State would be the better team. And Ohio State ended up playing USC in the Rose Bowl. The ranked teams of the Big Ten were number 2 Ohio State and number 6 Michigan. Moving on towards the other schools. Here's a good time to talk about all of the independents. Notre Dame, Houston, Tulane, and Penn State, all being ranked. The winner of the MAC, Miami, Ohio, was ranked. The winner of the Western Conference, which I almost added as their own slide, but decided not to, was Arizona State, because they were the only ranked team. And then the Pacific had San Diego State, who is ranked. Other conferences that had no ranked teams included the Missouri Valley, the Ivy League, yes, the Ivy League was in there, and the Southern Conference. Now, Notre Dame ended up being the champion of the 1973 season. The national championship included then number 4 Notre Dame and number 1 Alabama. Alabama dropped to 4 after this game because Notre Dame won. And the reason why number 4 Notre Dame had to play was because number 2 Ohio State kind of had to play in the Rose Bowl due to their conference's rules, and Oklahoma was ineligible due to some violation they had a couple years before. Therefore, Notre Dame ended up beating Alabama and won. Here are the final rankings of the season. Number 1, Notre Dame. Number 2, Ohio State, followed by Oklahoma, Bama, Penn State, Michigan, Nebraska, USC. A tie at 9 between Arizona State, Houston, Texas Tech, UCLA, LSU, Texas, Miami, Ohio, NC State, Missouri, Kansas. A tie at 19 between SDSU and Tennessee. Now, the weird thing is, Maryland and Tulane were both listed as 20th, but I just put them as a tie for 21 because that's actually the case. And then there you go. Here was the 1973 season of college football. A lot of these teams are still good today. Notre Dame, Ohio State, Michigan, Oklahoma, Bama, Penn State. All of these teams are still top contenders year by year. Now, some schools have kind of fallen off a little bit, and some schools really haven't. Actually, when I'm kind of looking at this, almost every single one of these teams has really good so far this year. Maybe except for Nebraska. They have a losing record right now, but the rest of these teams in here actually have winning records right now. And most of these teams are actually ranked. still today. Wait, SDSU might have a losing record too. But Ohio's actually doing good today too. So, short story is short. A lot of teams that are good usually stay good. But there are some changes. Here I'm going to show, or have showed, that the year 1973 was a completely different year for college football. But in reality, a lot of things have really stayed the same. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe. I know I wasn't perfect. The audio is terrible. My bad. I don't have a $100 microphone. Thank you, and stay crispy.